6 months after that Tuesday afternoon at McDonald's, Keanu found himself sitting in a courthouse waiting to testify. The trial of David Vance had been expedited due to the overwhelming evidence and public interest. The courtroom was packed with journalists, victims' families, and people who simply wanted to see justice served. Keanu had attended trials before, researched for movie roles, but this was entirely different. This time, his words would carry real weight. They would help determine whether a dangerous predator spent the rest of his life behind bars. Detective Lynn met him in the hallway outside the courtroom. She looked tired but satisfied. The kind of exhaustion that comes from seeing a difficult case through to its conclusion. Vance's defense is going to try to paint Michael's whispered statement as unreliable. They'll argue that a 5-year-old could have misunderstood, exaggerated, or imagined the threat. Your testimony about Michael's demeanor, the specific details he provided, the genuine terror you witnessed, that's going to counter their narrative. I'll tell them exactly what I saw, Keanu promised. That's all we need. When his name was called, Keanu took the stand and was sworn in. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Janet Huang, guided him through his testimony with practiced efficiency. He described the ordinary lunch that had become extraordinary, the moment Michael approached his table, the weight and clarity of the child's whispered words. He explained how Michael's fear was palpable and real, how the specific details about the surveillance photos and threats against his baby sister were far too elaborate for a child to fabricate. The defense attorney's cross-examination was aggressive, as expected. He tried to suggest that Keanu had overreacted, that his action movie background made him see danger where none existed, that Michael might have simply been a fan nervous about approaching a celebrity. Keanu remained calm and factual, never embellishing, never backing down from what he'd witnessed. Mr. Reeves, the defense attorney pressed, "Isn't it possible that my client was simply sitting in his car in a public parking lot, and you and this child created a narrative of danger based on coincidence and imagination?" Keanu met his eyes steadily. "The surveillance photos found in your client's apartment showed Michael's house, his sister's bedroom window, their daily routines. That's not coincidence. The items in his trunk, the detailed files on 15 families, the evidence connecting him to missing children, that's not imagination. What I witnessed was a terrified child who knew specific details about being stalked, and his terror was validated by everything police discovered." The defense attorney tried a few more approaches, but nothing stuck. The evidence was simply too overwhelming. When Keanu stepped down from the witness stand, he caught Michael's eye in the gallery. The boy was sitting between his mother and grandmother, holding baby Lily on his lap. He gave Keanu a small wave and a smile. That smile, free from the terror that had marked their first meeting, made everything worthwhile. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Michael testified too, though his testimony was conducted with special accommodations given his age. A child psychologist was present, and the questions were carefully structured to avoid re-traumatizing him. But even at 5, soon to be 6, Michael was clear and consistent about what had happened. The jury could see that this wasn't a confused child or a coached witness. This was someone who'd lived through something terrifying and was brave enough to speak about it. The other families connected to Vance's surveillance files also testified. Mrs. Patterson, whose 8-year-old daughter had been photographed outside her school for weeks without anyone noticing. Mr. and Mrs. Chen, Amanda's parents, who described the day their daughter disappeared, and the agonizing months of not knowing what happened to her. The Rodriguez family's near miss put faces to statistics, humanized the abstract concept of child predators, and showed the jury exactly what kind of man David Vance really was. When the verdict came back, it was unanimous on all counts. Guilty of kidnapping, murder, attempted kidnapping, stalking, and a dozen other charges. The courtroom erupted in restrained celebration. People wept, others hugged. Mrs. Rodriguez buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with relief. The sentencing phase would come later, but everyone knew Vance would never see freedom again. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. News crews set up their cameras. Reporters practiced their live shots, and advocates for children's safety organized a small vigil. Keanu slipped out a side entrance, wanting to avoid the spectacle, but he ran into Mrs. Rodriguez and Michael doing the same thing. "Thank you," Mrs. Rodriguez said for probably the 100th time since this all began. "Thank you for believing him. Thank you for acting. Thank you for being there when we needed someone. How are you doing?" Keanu asked, directing the question at Michael. Really doing? Michael thought about it seriously, his face scrunched up in concentration. I still get scared sometimes, especially when Mom has to go somewhere without me. But Dr. Williams says that's normal and it'll get better. She teaches me breathing exercises. Dr. Williams was the child psychologist Keanu had helped connect the family with, calling in a favor with a specialist known for working with trauma survivors. He'd also quietly set up a trust fund for Michael's education and Lily's future, wanting to ensure the family had one less thing to worry about as they healed. That's really good that you're talking to Dr. Williams, Keanu said. And you know what? Being scared sometimes after something scary happens, that doesn't mean you're not brave. Bravery isn't about never being afraid. It's about doing the right thing even when you are afraid. That's what Mom says too, Michael replied, then added with the brutal honesty of childhood. She still cries sometimes at night. I hear her, but she's being brave too. Mrs. Rodriguez wiped at her eyes, embarrassed to be called out by her son, but not denying it. We're all healing together. It takes time. Over the following months, Keanu watched as the Rodriguez family slowly rebuilt their sense of safety and normalcy. He didn't insert himself into their lives, understanding that they needed space to heal without feeling obligated to a famous benefactor. But he stayed in touch through occasional messages, attending Michael's 6th birthday party at the boys' excited invitation, and quietly ensuring they had the resources they needed for therapy and security upgrades to their home. The story's impact rippled outward in ways nobody could have predicted. Schools across the country implemented new safety protocols. Police departments received additional funding for units dedicated to tracking predators and online exploitation. A documentary crew followed the case with the Rodriguez family's permission, creating an educational film used in schools to teach children about safety and speaking up. Keanu became an advocate, though he never sought the role. He worked with organizations focused on child protection, lending his voice and resources to causes he'd never paid much attention to before that Tuesday afternoon. He attended fundraisers, spoke at conferences, and used his platform to keep the conversation going long after the news cycle moved on to other stories. One evening, almost a year after the McDonald's encounter, Keanu received an email from Detective Lynn. The subject line read, "Thought you'd want to know." Inside was a brief message and an attachment. The FBI task force that formed from the Vance investigation has now made 43 arrests across 7 states. They've rescued 19 children who were actively being exploited. The network has been dismantled. None of this would have happened without that day at McDonald's. Without you listening to a scared kid and taking him seriously. Sometimes I think about all the ways that day could have gone wrong. All the moments where things could have turned out differently, but they didn't. Thought you should know the full extent of what your actions set in motion. The attachment was a photo from a recent operation, showing rescued children being reunited with their families. Keanu stared at those faces, at the tears and smiles and desperate hugs, and felt the weight of it settle over him. 19 children who would grow up, who would have birthdays and graduations and futures that had almost been stolen from them. All because Michael Rodriguez had been brave enough to whisper to a stranger in a restaurant. He thought about how easily he could have dismissed the boy, how he could have smiled politely and sent him back to his mother without really listening, how he could have talked himself out of getting involved, convincing himself it wasn't his problem or that he was misreading the situation. The path from potential tragedy to actual rescue had been so narrow, balanced on split-second decisions and one child's desperate courage. 2 years after the incident, Keanu attended Michael's elementary school graduation from kindergarten. The boy was thriving now, his trauma not forgotten but integrated into who he was becoming. He'd grown taller, his voice more confident, his smile coming easier. During the ceremony, the principal spoke about courage and community, about how everyone in the room had the power to make a difference if they chose to pay attention and take action. After the ceremony, Michael ran up to Keanu with a hand-drawn card. Inside, written in much neater handwriting than that first picture from the park, was a simple message. You saved my life. When I grow up, I want to save people too. Thank you for being my hero. Keanu knelt down to Michael's level, just like he had that day in the McDonald's office when everything was terrifying and uncertain. You saved your own life by being brave enough to ask for help. And you know what? You already are saving people. Because of what you did, because of how brave you were, Other kids learned that it's okay to speak up. Other adults learned to listen better. You started something important. Detective Lynn said I could be a police officer when I grow up if I want, Michael said, his eyes bright with possibility. She said they need people who understand what it's like to be scared but do the brave thing anyway. You'd make an excellent officer, Keanu agreed. Or an excellent anything you choose to be. Because you've got something really special. You've got courage and you've got compassion. And you've got the ability to trust your instincts when something's wrong. Those are going to take you far. As Keanu drove home that evening, he thought about all the small moments that had led to that Tuesday afternoon. The decision to go to that specific McDonald's. The choice to sit in that particular booth. The willingness to trust a 5-year-old's whispered fear. Any one of those moments could have gone differently, and the outcome would have been tragic. But they didn't go differently. They aligned in a way that saved a life and ultimately saved many lives. He'd spent his career pretending to be a hero in movies, executing carefully choreographed fights against scripted villains. But real heroism, he'd learned, was often much quieter. It was listening when a child spoke. It was taking fear seriously even when it might be nothing. It was choosing to get involved when walking away would have been easier. It was being present and paying attention to the world around you, ready to act when action was needed. Years later, long after the media attention faded and the story became a footnote in crime history archives, Keanu would sometimes think about that day. He'd remember the weight of Michael's small hand gripping his sleeve, the terror in those blue eyes, the whispered words that changed everything. And he'd remember the lesson that a 5-year-old boy taught him about courage, about the importance of speaking up, and about the responsibility every adult has to listen when children say they're afraid. Because in the end, that's what it came down to. Not fame or fortune or action movie training, just the simple choice to believe a frightened child and to act on that belief. That's what saved Michael Rodriguez. That's what dismantled a predatory network. That's what reminded people everywhere that heroism isn't about special powers or superhuman abilities. It's about being human in the moments when humanity matters most, and sometimes, heroism starts with nothing more than a whispered plea and someone willing to listen. The story hit the news that evening, and by the next morning it was everywhere. Not because of Keanu's involvement, though that certainly added to the media frenzy, but because of what investigators found when they dug deeper into David Vance's life. The blue sedan had been just the beginning. When police executed a search warrant on Vance's apartment across town, they discovered a nightmare. Keanu learned about it from Detective Lynn, who called him the following afternoon. He'd been at home trying to process everything that had happened when his phone rang. The detective's voice was heavy with exhaustion, the kind that comes from working 30 hours straight on a case that gets worse with every new piece of evidence. "I wanted you to hear this from me before it hits the media circus," she said. Vance's apartment was a command center. He had surveillance equipment, telephoto lenses, thousands of photographs of children around Los Angeles and neighboring counties. We found detailed notes on family schedules, school drop-off times, security weaknesses in homes. This man had been planning abductions with military precision. Keanu sat down heavily on his couch. "How many families?" "At least 15 that we can identify from the photographs. The Rodriguez family was just his most recent target. We're in the process of contacting all the other families now to inform them and check for any attempted break-ins or suspicious activity they might have missed." "The missing children you mentioned before," Keanu said quietly. "Did you find anything about them?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "We found trophies, items of clothing, toys, personal belongings. We're running DNA analysis now, but we're fairly certain they belong to the 2 children who went missing last year. 6-year-old Amanda Chen from Riverside and 7-year-old Christopher Wells from San Bernardino. We've already notified their families." The weight of it settled over Keanu like a physical thing. 2 children who could have been saved if Vance had been caught sooner. 2 families who would finally have answers, but answers that would bring no comfort. He thought about Michael's blue eyes, his terrified whisper. How close the boy had come to joining Amanda and Christopher. "There's more," Detective Lynn continued. "We found communications on his computer, encrypted messages with other individuals discussing similar activities. The FBI has taken over that part of the investigation. This goes beyond one predator. We're looking at a network." Keanu felt sick. This was the kind of evil that people wanted to believe was rare, exaggerated by sensational media. But here it was, Real and documented and far more organized than anyone wanted to admit. "Why are you telling me all this?" he asked. "Because Michael keeps asking about you," Detective Lynn said, her voice softening slightly. "And because you're going to be asked to testify when this goes to trial. You're a witness. You heard Michael's statement. You observed Vance's behavior. You can speak to the immediate danger the child was in. Defense attorneys are going to try to paint this as an overreaction, a misunderstanding. Your testimony will matter. Whatever you need," Keanu said immediately. "I'll be there." "I figured you'd say that." He could hear the slight smile in her voice. "There's something else. The media is going crazy with this story. Your involvement is making it huge news, which is actually helpful in some ways. Public awareness about these predators, about how organized they can be. That's valuable. But Mrs. Rodriguez is being hounded by reporters. She's a single mother working 2 jobs, and now she's got news cameras parked outside her house 24/7. Keanu understood what wasn't being said. "I'll make a statement. Draw the attention away from them." "That would help the family a lot," Detective Lynn confirmed. "But be prepared. It's going to get intense." She wasn't wrong. Keanu's publicist set up a brief press conference for the following morning. News outlets from around the world showed up, cramming into a small conference room with cameras and microphones and endless questions. Keanu kept his statement short and focused. "I was in the right place at the right time. Michael Rodriguez is the real hero in this story. He was brave enough to ask for help when he was terrified. He thought about protecting his little sister even when he was in danger himself. That's the story that matters. As for David Vance and the investigation, I trust the police and prosecutors to handle that. What I hope people take away from this is simple. Listen to children. When a kid says they're scared, believe them. Take them seriously. Michael's quick thinking saved his life. Maybe it can inspire other children who are in danger to speak up, and inspire adults to actually listen when they do." The questions came fast and loud. How did he know what to do? Was he scared? What did Michael whisper? Did he think he was in danger? What was it like confronting a real predator after playing action heroes? Keanu answered what he could and deflected the rest, always bringing the focus back to Michael's courage and the importance of child safety. But one question caught him off guard. A reporter from a national network asked, "Do you think your fame played a role in saving this child? Would Michael have approached someone less recognizable?" Keanu paused, considering. "I've thought about that. Maybe Michael felt like he could trust me because he'd seen me in movies. Or maybe he approached me because I happened to be sitting alone and looked approachable. I don't know. What I do know is that children should feel like they can approach any adult when they're in danger. We should all be the kind of people kids feel safe asking for help." After the press conference, Keanu went home and did something he rarely did. He looked at social media. The story was everywhere, dominating headlines and trending topics. But what struck him most were the comments from parents talking about having conversations with their own children, about safety, about speaking up, about trusting their instincts. Teachers were discussing it in classrooms. Child safety advocates were using the story to push for better protections and education. 3 days later, Detective Lynn called again. "Vance is talking. Well, his lawyer is negotiating anyway. They want to avoid the death penalty, so he's giving up information about the network. We've made 4 additional arrests in 3 states. Every single one of them had similar setups. Surveillance equipment, detailed files on families, plans for abductions. That's good news, isn't it?" Keanu asked. "It is. But it's also terrifying how organized this was. These weren't random acts. This was coordinated hunting." She paused. "We found something else. In Vance's files there were notes about you." Keanu went still. "What kind of notes?" "Observations about your patterns. Where you go. What restaurants you frequent, the fact that you often eat alone. Nothing actionable, just notations. We think he was considering whether you might pose a problem if you happened to be around when he made his move at that McDonald's. He knew you sometimes went there." The implications were chilling. Vance hadn't just been watching the Rodriguez family. He'd been monitoring potential interference, calculating risks, planning for variables. This level of preparation, this cold calculation. It was like something from a crime thriller, except it was real. "Did he know I'd be there that specific day?" Keanu asked. "No. That was pure chance, which is why he proceeded with his plan. He gambled that you wouldn't notice or wouldn't get involved. Obviously, he gambled wrong." Over the following weeks, the investigation continued to expand. The FBI's involvement brought resources and expertise that uncovered even more victims. Families were notified. Some children were found and rescued from horrible situations. Others were confirmed deceased, their fates finally known after months or years of uncertainty. It was devastating and victorious in equal measure. Keanu received letters, hundreds of them, then thousands. Parents thanking him for raising awareness. Survivors of childhood abduction sharing their stories. Teachers and counselors describing how they were using the story to teach children about safety and speaking up. One letter came from Amanda Chen's family, thanking him for helping catch their daughter's killer, for giving them closure even though the news was the worst possible outcome. He couldn't read them all. It was too much, too heavy, but he read enough to understand that something had shifted. The story had touched a nerve, sparked conversations that needed to happen, forced people to confront realities they preferred to ignore. Mrs. Rodriguez reached out through Detective Lynn, asking if she and Michael could meet with Keanu privately. They arranged to meet at a park on a sunny Saturday morning, away from cameras and reporters. Michael ran up and hugged him immediately, the fear gone from his eyes now, replaced with the natural energy of a 5-year-old who'd been given time to heal. "I drew you a picture," Michael announced, pulling a folded piece of paper from his pocket. It showed 2 stick figures, one tall and one small, standing in front of what was clearly meant to be a McDonald's. Above them, drawn in bright yellow crayon, was a sun with the words, "Thank you," written in careful kindergarten letters. "It's perfect," Keanu said, meaning it. "I'm going to keep this forever." Mrs. Rodriguez looked better too. The exhaustion and terror had faded from her face, replaced by something harder and more determined. "They've been offering me interview after interview," she said. "Big money, national television. I've turned them all down, but Detective Lynn suggested I might want to do one. With you there if you're willing. To talk about child safety awareness, teaching kids to speak up. Not about the details of what happened, but about prevention. If you think it would help, I'll do it," Keanu agreed. "I want other parents to understand what I missed," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "The unlocked door I dismissed. The way Michael was quieter than usual. The fact that he seemed scared to be alone. I missed all the signs because I was so busy, so stressed with work and bills and just trying to survive. I don't want other parents to make the same mistakes." They did the interview together a week later, on a morning talk show that agreed to handle the topic sensitively. Mrs. Rodriguez spoke about the warning signs she'd missed. Michael, with surprising composure for someone so young, talked about being scared but knowing he needed to tell someone. Keanu discussed the importance of taking children seriously when they express fear or discomfort. The response was overwhelming. The segment was shared millions of times. Child safety organizations saw their call volumes increase tenfold with parents seeking advice and education. Schools implemented new programs. Communities organized awareness events. It wouldn't prevent all tragedies, but it was something. It was change born from near disaster. Progress purchased with terror that had, by the smallest margin, been averted. One of the officers searching the blue sedan suddenly straightened up and called over his partner. Even from inside the McDonald's, Keanu could see the tension in their body language. Whatever they'd found in that trunk wasn't just concerning. It was horrifying. The second officer looked inside and immediately stepped back, speaking urgently into his radio. Within minutes, more units arrived, including an unmarked car that Keanu recognized as a detective's vehicle. The detective who emerged was a woman in her mid-40s, dressed in professional attire with her badge clipped to her belt. She moved with the confidence of someone who'd seen too much but hadn't let it break her. After speaking briefly with the uniformed officers, she made her way into the restaurant, her eyes scanning until they landed on Keanu's table. "I'm Detective Patricia Lynn," she introduced herself, shaking Keanu's hand before turning to Michael's mother. "Ma'am, I need to speak with you and your son. Is there a private area we can use?" She looked at the manager, who quickly offered her office. Before they moved, Detective Lynn crouched down to Michael's eye level. Her voice was gentle, nothing like the stern authority she'd used with her fellow officers. "Hey there, brave guy. You did something really incredible today. I'm going to need your help a little bit more, okay? I need you to tell me everything you remember about the man who talked to you." Michael nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. His mother looked at Keanu, a silent question in her eyes. "Should he come too?" Keanu started to decline to give them privacy, but Detective Lynn stopped him. Actually, Mr. Reeves, I'd like you there as well. Michael clearly trusts you and it might help him feel more comfortable. She paused, then added quietly, and you're probably going to want to hear this too, what we found in that vehicle. It's connected to something much bigger. They moved to the manager's small office, a cramped space with a desk covered in paperwork and a couple of chairs. The manager brought in extra seating, and someone had the thoughtfulness to grab Michael's unfinished Happy Meal. The boy sat between his mother and Keanu, his small hand still gripping the actor's jacket sleeve. Detective Lynn pulled out a notepad but kept her body language open and friendly. Michael, can you tell me when you first saw the man in the blue car? Michael's voice was quiet. Last week. He was outside my school. I saw him watching the playground. His mother's sharp intake of breath was audible. Why didn't you tell me? He said if I told anyone, he'd hurt Lily, Michael whispered. He knew her name, Mom. He knew she sleeps in the room with the yellow curtains. He showed me pictures on his phone of our house, of Lily's room, of everything. Keanu felt sick. This wasn't a random opportunistic predator. This was someone who had been stalking this family with planning and precision. The detective's expression remained neutral, but her pen was moving rapidly across her notepad. Did he ever try to touch you or get close to you? Detective Lynn asked. No, he always stayed far away. But yesterday when Mom brought me here for lunch, he was in the parking lot again. He walked by our car really slow and put something on the window. It was a piece of paper with a phone number and a picture of Lily. It said to read the message he sent. The mother was crying openly now. Michael, honey, why didn't you tell me? I could have helped. I could have called the police. He said he was always watching, Michael explained, his voice breaking. He said if police came to our house, he'd know. He said he had friends everywhere who were watching Lily. He said today when you went to the bathroom I had to walk outside with him or Lily would get hurt. But then I saw him. Michael pointed at Keanu. And I thought maybe if I told someone famous, someone important, they could help without the bad man knowing. Keanu had to look away for a moment, overwhelmed by the weight of what this 5-year-old had been carrying. The intelligence, the quick thinking, the absolute terror of trying to protect his baby sister while being threatened by a grown man. It was too much for anyone, let alone a kindergartner. Detective Lynn finished her notes and stood up. Mrs. Rodriguez, I need to be honest with you about what we found in that vehicle. We discovered rope, duct tape, and several items of children's clothing in different sizes. There were also photographs. She paused, clearly choosing her words carefully with Michael in the room. Lots of photographs of different children outside schools, playgrounds, and homes across 3 different counties. The mother's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob. Detective Lynn continued, her voice gentle but firm. The man we arrested is named David Vance. He's been on our radar for about 6 months, connected to 2 missing children cases in neighboring states. But we never had enough evidence to bring him in. Until today. What your son did, what Mr. Reeves did, you've given us what we needed. That evidence in his vehicle can be tied to the missing children. We can finally build a case that will put him away for a very long time. Keanu felt the full weight of how close this had come to disaster. If Michael hadn't been brave enough to ask for help, if Keanu hadn't taken him seriously, if the police had been even a minute later, this little boy would have become another statistic, another face on a missing poster, another family destroyed by grief. I need to ask you something difficult, Detective Lynn said to Mrs. Rodriguez. Has anything unusual happened around your home recently? Any signs of a break-in, things moved or missing, anything out of place? The mother thought for a moment, then her face went white. About 2 weeks ago, I thought I left the back door unlocked. I always lock it, always, but one morning it was open. I figured I'd just forgotten, but he was in our house, Detective Lynn confirmed grimly. That's how he got the photographs from inside. That's how he knew details about Lily's room. I'm going to need you to come down to the station to give a full statement. We'll also need to arrange protection for your family until we're certain Vance was working alone. The implications were staggering. This man had been in their home, photographing their children while they slept, learning every detail of their lives. Keanu thought about all the movie villains he'd faced on screen, all the elaborate plots and evil schemes. None of it came close to the real horror of what this family had endured. There was a knock on the office door, and another officer poked his head in. Detective, you need to see this. His face was grim, aged by whatever he'd just discovered. Detective Lynn excused herself and stepped outside. Through the partially open door, Keanu could hear urgent, hushed conversation. Words like evidence and database and multiple victims drifted into the small office. When the detective returned, her expression was carefully controlled, but Keanu could see the anger simmering beneath the surface. "We're going to need to expand this investigation," she said carefully, clearly moderating her language for Michael's sake. "What we found in that vehicle is connecting to other cases. You've done something remarkable today, Michael. Because you were brave enough to ask for help, you didn't just save yourself. You're going to help us save other children too." Michael looked up at Keanu, his eyes still red from crying. "Really?" "Really," Keanu confirmed, putting his hand on the boy's shoulder. "You're a hero, buddy. A real one. Not like the fake ones in my movies. An actual hero." The rest of the afternoon passed in a surreal haze. More officers arrived to take statements. Crime scene investigators photographed everything. The media got wind of the story, and news vans began pulling into the parking lot, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like metal flowers seeking sunlight. The manager had to lock the front doors to keep reporters from pushing inside. Detective Lynn arranged for Mrs. Rodriguez and Michael to be escorted home by police officers who would then sweep the house for any signs of surveillance devices or additional evidence of Vance's stalking. She assigned 2 officers to stand watch outside their home until they could assess whether Vance had any accomplices who might pose a continued threat. "What about my mother?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked, suddenly, panic in her voice. "She's home with Lily. She doesn't know what's happening." "We've already dispatched officers to your residence," Detective Lynn assured her. "Your mother and daughter are safe. We made contact with her 10 minutes ago and explained the situation. She's been advised to keep all doors and windows locked until the protective detail arrives." Keanu watched as mother and son prepared to leave with their police escort. Mrs. Rodriguez turned to him, tears streaming down her face again. "I don't know how to thank you. If you hadn't been here, if you hadn't believed him—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Michael's the one who saved himself," Keanu said honestly. "He was smart enough and brave enough to ask for help. That took incredible courage." As they were walking out, Michael pulled free from his mother's hand and ran back to Keanu. The boy wrapped his small arms around the actor's waist in a fierce hug. "Thank you for believing me," he whispered. "Thank you for not thinking I was making it up." Keanu knelt down and returned the hug. "I'll always believe kids when they say they're scared. Always. You remember that, okay? If something ever feels wrong, tell someone. Keep telling people until someone listens." After they left, Keanu gave his own statement to the police, recounting every detail of Michael's whispered plea, the suspicious vehicle, the tense standoff. Detective Lynn took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When they finished, she closed her notepad and looked at him directly. "You should know that what you did today, the way you handled this situation, it was textbook perfect. You kept the child calm, created a crowd of witnesses, didn't tip off the suspect, and bought us time to arrive. Most people would have panicked or made mistakes that could have cost that boy his life." "I was terrified," Keanu admitted. "I had no idea if I was doing the right thing." "But you did it anyway," she said. "That's what bravery actually is. Not the absence of fear, but action in spite of it." As Keanu finally left the restaurant hours later, the sun was beginning to set. The parking lot was still full of police vehicles and crime scene tape. News cameras tracked his exit, reporters shouting questions he didn't answer. His quiet Tuesday lunch had turned into something he'd never forget. But more importantly, a little boy named Michael was going home safely to his baby sister, and a predator who had terrorized families across multiple states was finally in custody, his hunting days over. The dispatcher's voice came through Keanu's phone, calm but firm. "Sir, the units are 3 minutes out. Do not approach the vehicle. Do not confront anyone. Just keep the child in sight and keep people around him." Keanu watched as the mother stood up fully now, smoothing down her work uniform. She was saying something to her son, probably the usual instructions parents give. "Stay here, I'll be right back, don't talk to strangers." The horrible irony wasn't lost on Keanu. The stranger her son needed to worry about wasn't inside the restaurant. He was sitting outside in a blue sedan, waiting like a spider in a web. The boy's eyes went wide with panic as his mother turned toward the restroom. Keanu could see the child's breathing getting faster, could see him starting to stand up as if he might follow her. But then the little boy's gaze shifted to the parking lot, to that blue car and he froze. The threat against his baby sister was working exactly as the predator had planned. The child was paralyzed with fear, knowing that any wrong move might hurt someone he loved. Keanu made a split-second decision. Movie training or not, he couldn't just sit there and watch. He ended the call with the dispatcher after confirming the police were close, then stood up and walked directly to the boy's table. The mother had just disappeared around the corner toward the restrooms. The actor slid into the booth across from the child, putting on his warmest smile even though his heart was racing. "Hey there, champ," Keanu said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "Sorry I'm late. Your mom asked me to keep an eye on you while she's gone, remember?" The confusion on the boy's face lasted only a second before understanding dawned. This was help. This was the answer to his desperate whisper. The child's small hand shot across the table and grabbed Keanu's sleeve, holding on like it was the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly become terrifying and unstable. "You like superheroes?" Keanu asked, keeping his voice cheerful and normal. He pulled out his phone and opened up some pictures from his movie sets, showing them to the boy. "Look, this is from when I was fighting the bad guys. See all those explosions? None of it's real. It's all movie magic." The boy stared at the pictures and slowly some of the panic started to drain from his face. Other people in the restaurant were beginning to notice now. A teenage girl at a nearby table did a double take, then whispered something to her friend. Within seconds, both of them had their phones out, not to call for help, but to take pictures and videos. More people started looking over. A family with 3 kids stopped eating to stare. An older gentleman squinted, clearly trying to figure out if that was really who he thought it was. Keanu had spent years trying to avoid this kind of attention, but right now it was exactly what he needed. The more people who were watching, the safer this child was. A predator couldn't snatch a kid from a crowded restaurant where a famous actor was sitting right there, with dozens of phones recording every moment. The situation had become too public, too visible, too documented. Through the window, Keanu could see movement in the blue sedan. Someone was shifting around inside, clearly noticing the commotion. The actor kept his body language relaxed and friendly, kept talking to the boy about movies and special effects, but his eyes kept tracking that car. Every instinct he had was screaming that something bad was about to happen. "Do you have any brothers or sisters?" Keanu asked the boy, already knowing the answer. "A baby sister," the child whispered, his voice so small and scared. "She's only 1. She's at home with my grandma. I bet she's lucky to have a brave big brother like you," Keanu said softly. "You did exactly the right thing by telling me. You might have just saved her life, you know that?" The boy's eyes filled with tears, but he blinked them back hard. He was trying so hard to be brave. This little 5-year-old kid who should have been worried about nothing more serious than what cartoon to watch or what toy he wanted. Instead, he was carrying the weight of his family's safety on his tiny shoulders. More people were gathering now. A small crowd had formed at a respectful distance, everyone with their phones out. Some were taking selfies, trying to get Keanu in the background. Others were just recording, capturing this strange moment of a movie star hanging out with a random kid at McDonald's. The restaurant manager, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes, walked over with a concerned expression. "Is everything okay here?" she asked, looking between Keanu and the boy. Keanu met her eyes steadily. "There's a situation. Police are on the way. Could you make sure the doors stay monitored? Don't let anyone suspicious approach this table." The manager's expression changed immediately. She'd clearly dealt with enough difficult situations to recognize real danger when she heard it. She nodded once sharply and moved toward the front of the restaurant. Keanu noticed her speaking quietly to one of the young men working the register, a stocky guy who looked like he might have played football in high school. The employee nodded and positioned himself near the entrance, trying to look casual but clearly on alert. The door to the restroom area opened and the boy's mother emerged, drying her hands on a paper towel. She froze when she saw Keanu sitting at her table with her son. Her face went through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, recognition, more confusion, and then concern. She hurried over. "I'm sorry, is my son bothering you?" she asked, looking mortified. "Michael, what did I tell you about disturbing people?" So the boy's name was Michael. Keanu filed that away. "No bother at all," Keanu said, his voice warm. "Michael and I were just talking about movies. But listen, I need you to stay calm and sit down. There's something you need to know, and I need you to not panic." The mother's face went pale. She slid into the booth next to her son, automatically putting her arm around him. "What's wrong? What happened?" Keanu leaned forward, speaking quietly so the growing crowd of onlookers couldn't hear. "Your son came to me because someone threatened him. There's a blue sedan in the parking lot. The person inside has been watching your family. They threatened Michael's baby sister if he didn't cooperate." The color drained completely from the mother's face. Her hand tightened on Michael's shoulder. "That's not possible. Why would anyone—" "Police are almost here," Keanu said firmly. "But I need you to stay right here with me. Don't go to your car. Don't go outside. Just stay here where there are people and cameras." As if on cue, the sound of sirens began to wail in the distance. The noise was faint at first, barely audible over the chatter of the restaurant and the sound of orders being called out. But it grew louder with each passing second. The mother's hand flew to her mouth. Michael's grip on Keanu's sleeve tightened even more. Through the window, Keanu saw the door of the blue sedan open. A man stepped out and everything about him screamed danger. He was middle-aged, wearing jeans and a dark jacket despite the warm weather. Sunglasses covered his eyes even though he was about to walk indoors. His posture was tense, aggressive, like a predator that had been disturbed mid-hunt. The man started walking toward the McDonald's entrance. He moved with purpose, his pace quick but not quite running. Keanu felt his muscles tense, felt every nerve in his body preparing for confrontation. He'd done hundreds of fight scenes, but those had all been choreographed, rehearsed, safe. This was real. If this man made it inside and tried to grab Michael, Keanu would have to physically stop him. There would be no stunt coordinator calling cut, no safety pads or trick punches. The teenage football player near the door must have sensed something wrong, because he moved to block the entrance, his large frame filling the doorway. The stranger stopped just outside, and for a moment the two men stared at each other through the glass. The manager appeared beside her employee, phone in hand, clearly ready to call for help if needed. The sirens were much louder now, close, maybe only a block away. The stranger's head turned sharply toward the sound, then back to the restaurant. Even through the sunglasses, Keanu could feel the man's eyes scanning the scene. All those people with their phones out. The crowd around Keanu's table. The employees blocking the door. The actor sitting right there with the target of his hunt. For a handful of heartbeats, nobody moved. The entire restaurant seemed frozen, caught in this moment of tension where everything hung in the balance. Keanu kept himself between Michael and the door, ready to move if needed. The mother was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face as she held her son close. Michael was shaking but trying to be brave, just like he'd been trying to be brave when he'd first whispered his terrifying secret. Then the first police car pulled into the parking lot, lights flashing. The stranger took one look at the approaching vehicle and bolted. He ran back toward his blue sedan, moving fast now, abandoning any pretense of normalcy. The football player burst out of the restaurant door, shouting and pointing. The manager was already on the phone, probably with 911, giving them a play-by-play of what was happening. More police cars arrived, 2, then 3. They moved with practiced precision, blocking the exits from the parking lot. The blue sedan's engine roared to life, but it was too late. The car was boxed in, surrounded by black and white vehicles with their lights painting everything in alternating red and blue. Officers emerged with their weapons drawn, shouting commands that Keanu couldn't quite hear from inside the restaurant. The man in the blue sedan tried to reverse, tried to find an escape route that didn't exist. His car jerked backward, then forward, tires squealing, but there was nowhere to go. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 seconds, the car stopped. The driver's door opened slowly. Hands emerged first, empty and raised. Then the man stepped out and officers swarmed him. Inside the McDonald's, the entire crowd erupted. Some people cheered. Others gasped. Many just stood there in shock, processing what they'd just witnessed. Keanu let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. His hands were shaking now, the adrenaline that had kept him steady finally catching up. Michael was sobbing into his mother's shirt, all the fear and stress finally breaking through his brave facade. 2 officers entered the restaurant and Keanu waved them over. The next hour passed in a blur of questions and statements. More police arrived, including detectives who took charge of the scene. The mother kept thanking Keanu over and over, her voice breaking with emotion. Michael wouldn't let go of his mother's hand, wouldn't let her out of his sight even for a moment. Outside, officers were searching the blue sedan. Even from inside the restaurant, Keanu could see their grim expressions as they pulled items from the trunk. Whatever they were finding, it was bad. Really bad. It was just another Tuesday afternoon in Los Angeles. The kind of day where the sun beats down on the pavement and people go about their business without expecting anything unusual to happen. Keanu Reeves had finished a long morning at the studio and wanted nothing more than a quiet meal somewhere he wouldn't be bothered. Fame had its perks, sure, but sometimes all a person wants is to sit down with a burger and fries without cameras flashing in their face. He pulled his old motorcycle into the parking lot of a small McDonald's on the edge of town. This place wasn't fancy or trendy. It was the kind of spot where working families stopped for a quick meal, where the playground equipment had seen better days, and where nobody really expected to see a Hollywood actor grabbing lunch. That's exactly why Keanu liked it. He threw on his worn leather jacket, pulled a baseball cap low over his eyes, and walked inside hoping for 20 minutes of peace. The restaurant was moderately busy. A few teenagers sat in one corner glued to their phones. An elderly couple shared a coffee near the window. A construction crew occupied a large table, their voices loud and cheerful as they joked about their day. Keanu ordered his usual nothing fancy, just a burger and some fries. The young woman behind the counter did a double take when she recognized him, but he gave her a gentle smile and she nodded, understanding he wanted privacy. She handed him his order without making a scene. He found a booth in the back corner away from the main flow of traffic. As he unwrapped his burger, Keanu let himself relax for the first time that day. The morning had been intense, full of complicated stunts and demanding directors. This simple moment sitting in a quiet booth with cheap food and no expectations felt like luxury. He took a bite and let his mind wander, thinking about the script he needed to review later that evening. That's when he noticed the boy. The kid couldn't have been more than 5 years old, sitting 3 tables away with his mother. While other children in the restaurant played or watched videos on tablets, this little boy sat completely still. His eyes were locked on Keanu with an intensity that seemed strange for someone so young. The actor had grown used to stares over the years, but this was different. The child wasn't starstruck or excited. He looked frightened. Keanu glanced at the boy's mother. She was absorbed in her phone, scrolling through something with complete focus. She seemed tired, the kind of exhaustion that comes from juggling too many responsibilities. Her purse sat on the table beside a half-eaten salad. She hadn't touched her food in minutes. The boy had barely touched his Happy Meal either. His small hands rested on the table, fingers clenched tight.